Let's talk security, current affairs, governance, politics, your view, elections, rule of law, economic issues, foreign events on the Talking Point. Talking Point, weekdays on this channel.
Sarah presently asked the president to probe the missing oil revenues and, of course, the unaccounted for funds with regards to the amount of monies we ought to have as a country talking about oil. Well, let me give you that information. Most of the newspapers had it, and precisely I'm going to go with the Punch. And that was 2 days ago when the information surfaced. And it's from the Social Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SERAP, that has called on President President Bola Tinubu, you must forgive me there, to launch an investigation into allegations of missing and unaccounted for funds totaling over $15 billion and, of course, $200 billion budgeted for refinery repairs in 2020 and 2021. This is not the first time we're hearing about refinery repairs, which goes under the acronym TAM, turnaround maintenance. And in this particular period that we're in, where we need to shore up all available funds, it's important that we begin to look at the leakages, we begin to plug them and have this conversation. And on that note, I welcome you to Talking Point. I am Ike Chikujuwa, your host. Today, I'll have the opportunity of discussing with an energy expert, someone who's widely traveled and very exposed to discuss issues of this kind. He's an engineer by profession. I have the privilege of having in the studios of Adbn and by extension Talking Point for the very first time, and I look forward to bringing him again. Dr. Wisdom Enang, FNSE, FN Safety E, and CENG, Senior Energy Consultant and Analyst. Dr. Wisdom, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
When we talk about missing crude oil revenues, or oil revenues as the case may be, as a Nigerian, when you hear such statements, what strikes you first? Is it that monies are missing somewhere in the oil sector, or what exactly strikes you first?
When you hear of missing crude oil revenues, it almost it's an indication of the problem that we currently have, which, you know, the flip side of the crude oil revenue is actually the FX, which is, or the lack of it is what we are experiencing at the moment. And there are many ways, truly speaking, that we have missed, just for the general public's consumption, that, you know, we can apply the term missing crude oil revenues. We can apply that. So top on our list, we can apply that to, say, theft, crude oil theft. We can also, you know, apply that to a compromise in our system of production where companies could probably underreport their production. Okay, we could also apply that to money that has been earmarked to develop our downstream sector and haven't quite done that. A whole of that is what, you know, classes as missing crude oil revenues, because those are the leakages that we have within the system. If we're talking about the one that has to do with the refineries, the first thing we need to understand starting is what is the fundamental flaw in the economic design that governed the construction of those refineries in the first place? Why did we even quite early get into let's start maintaining, let's start maintaining, let's start maintaining? And in fact, what seemed to be turnaround maintenance, right, was actually major overhauls that were going on. Okay, during the early days of, you know, production of oil, we decided to build a refinery, and that was for the purpose of actually ensuring that we can have, you know, a developed downstream. Because let me contextualize the point. As long as you are actually only taking crude and exporting crude, then, of course, you only have 15% of the possible money that you can make from the petroleum value chain. The petroleum value chain consists of the exploration and production, which is what gives rise to the raw crude. And then we have the downstream itself, the midstream and the downstream. The midstream has to do with all the transportation pipelines for both the crude condensate and the gas. The downstream has got to do with refining all the products, derivatives that come from the, come from crude itself. That's what, the country had, intended to do. However, the issue is, at the time these refineries were designed, they were designed to process heavy crude. Now, by definition, what that meant is that if you really wanted to use it at the within the operating envelope of that refinery, it means that you would have to, go and import heavy crude from Venezuela, for example, and come and refine it in country for you to be able to operate it at the level and such level that it was designed for. The moment you use light crude, which is what we're known for, that's why they call our crude body lights. The moment you use light crude, you're underusing those machines because they're not going to be operating at the operating level they're supposed to be operating. And what that means...
Forgive me to barge in for a bit there. By your analysis, are you insinuating that the installation or design of our, refineries by default were not meant to handle what they're handling, so we're underusing them?
Correct. So basically, if we use the word underuse, I'd like to clarify. So underuse is correct, right? But it's underusing them because we're using them for the wrong crude specification. That's what it meant. Not that we don't have the crude volumes to impute and process. So when you look at the consequences of feeding in a wrong feedstock. So let me give you an example. It's like saying I have gone to buy a car that is going to use diesel, and you have decided to run that car with PMS. That's what it means. The engine may fire, you may be able to trick, do something to the engine and still get it, but it would always break down because that wasn't how it was designed to run. Now, when we got to that point, where we figured out that there is only one way we can run this thing. Either we give up and say, look, we do not have the crude feedstock and let somebody else figure out what they're going to do with it, or which of the constituents they're going to focus on producing, and how they can even try to modify the feedstock of the crude to be able to even work at a certain capacity. Or we begin to import the crude from Venezuela.
The specification.
Correct. And then we decided to start running the facility with our own crude, and it was breaking down and breaking down. The problem there is we almost give a political answer to a technical question in this country. That's the problem I have. It's the frustration that features in many other examples. So basically, when that happened, it looked good for the blog to say we have our refineries broken down, we're going to mark XYZ money to it. It was the it was sort of the sort of political response that people wanted to, because it meant that there could be maintenance and they could take the money and consume that money, even when they know it's not still going to yield the results that is being required, that we require. So it was breaking down, we'll fix it. But the technical answer could have been, let's go to the root cause. Can we ever get these refineries to produce? So the number of questions you ask yourself, what is the design basis and the equipment capacity? Now, what is the operating capacity with the feedstock that we have? Okay, and then what is the run time to failure if we run this facility, so the question, that those questions could have gotten us to a point where we realize that no matter how you want to repair this and run it, it will keep breaking down and breaking down and breaking down. Now that's just me talking about the aspect that has to do with technicality. If you now add the component that has to do with political undertone, then of course you know where we're headed. We're headed on a one-way, into the ditch. That's where we're headed. If you add the political factor, why I'm saying that is this: the biggest problem we've ever had in most sectors is political will and conflict of interest. That's one of the biggest problems. Okay, you wanna come out and say, for example, just to digress a bit, you want to do fixing the electricity. The moment it starts, the electricity sector, although the market forces itself will frustrate you, but the guys importing generators will frustrate you. That's just the truth.
Let me understand, because we've heard the term market forces, most recently when the NNPC GMD, Emily Carey, talked about the recent increment. He used the term market forces, and we've heard many times in explanations how market forces determine the price of this petrol and whatnot. I'd like a clear understanding of this market forces. Is it a group of persons or indicators or what? What exactly is this market forces?
Okay, so let me attempt to list in an objective function. By that that's an engineering word. An objective function that of all the parameters that make up market forces. Okay, so let's imagine we have a bracket where we have the objective function fx, and then we have market force. One is, say, the feedstock price, the price of the feedstock. Market force 2 is the logistics to get it down here. Market force 3 is the nature of the contract. I'll give you an example. If my contract says that you should bring crude and come and refine products, and then at the terminal I'll hand you an equivalently priced crude
of what you're
giving me, then of course that will be a very different set of pricing mechanism that you would give to me compared to if I said I'm going to outrightly buy. And that would also be affected by the quantity that I actually purchase from you. Those are the factors to understand. And then when you come inside, you now look at storage costs. You now look at the logistics costs to where the end users are going to use it. And then you now look at the sort of profit appetite that our unions have, our organized, whether it be petroleum marketers.
No pang.
Correct. Those are the, those are the parameters that determine the end pricing as it affects. So, and then of course, exchange rates. So the question is, what is the exchange rate regime that you're getting? Because of course, when you talk about importation, we talk about like FX. So the question is, are we able to get this at the CBN rates or
the black market?
Or the black market rates? It will filter through to the final price for consumers. So when you hear market forces being that either canopy of factors, that those are the components that get in there. Now let me just speak a little bit as to the issue that is burning at the moment, and people are saying, is subsidy out or is subsidy in? This is the way I like to explain it. I've heard it, and I think this is a good opportunity to clear that out. When we look at the downstream sector, there was a huge drought of people who were willing to come and invest. Okay? And then when you look at the profitability equation for a lot of businesses, that equation was So a lot of people that did say they wanted to do refineries were optimizing diesel production. So think about it this way. They have a feedstock of crude. And whilst they perhaps have calculated that the pricing regime at the time for, for PMS was not profitable enough, they saw that if they can optimize their output on diesel, then of course the sum effect of that could still make them profitable. And so these were the people who could enter into the downstream at the time. They were the ones that could enter into the downstream because they were able to get in there, optimize their diesel production, and whilst the PMS was running at a loss. Okay? But not a lot of people could actually play around with these parameters. You need to be, extremely careful. The reason is the downstream sector is very unforgiving on its profit margins. So the moment that you are, sort of not getting it right, you could actually run a loss. Okay? Now, what happened at that time? By then, fuel was 180 something. What happened at that time was that the market, there was a drought in the amount of investments that we had. And so the announcement of the current president to take out that subsidy was intended to ensure that we can, in fact, have a pricing regime that makes us to be competitive whilst looking at PMS in isolation, so that somebody doesn't have to go look at PMS and in addition to diesel to be able to run a profitable business. As such, that was the overarching philosophy. How do we save our FX? So a number of ways. You've saved FX by, of course, making sure that instead of paying subsidy, you have saved that money for the country. Okay. Objective number one. Objective number two is by increasing the price, or not really increasing, by allowing the price to be determined fairly by what you have in the rest of the West African corridor, which is similar to us in pricing mechanism. You have actually stopped the aspect of smuggling. Because what used to happen is if you have 187 and then you're now having it sell in Ghana, say for about 800 naira. It was simple logic. Logistics will not carry the differential, so you still have a huge profit margin to play with, and that's what people were actually exploiting. Good. And then that's in addition to people putting out fake subsidy, slips, claims. Okay. Now, the more important bit is, as you remove fuel subsidy, you now, get into a point where demand will begin to drop holistically. People become more smarter. If I wanted to go, say, for example, to visit a friend from the mainland in Lagos to the island, and I need to do that for 4 friends, I'll probably plan the trips at the same time because I don't want to go that route twice. This is what has sort of come up. People are looking for alternative source of fuel, or looking more to, say, getting a solar system set up so that they don't have to spend. Now we know for a fact that our daily production has dropped dramatically. Okay. Now, the third thing is this: we've opened up our system, our pricing system, to be very competitive. Again, it is not still at parity with the rest of the African market. We're still the lowest in the West African corridor. However, it is competitive. Now, what the president did the first time was allow market forces to determine the pricing of PMS. And that was the case. if I look at all the things that has happened today, including the price change of the feedstock from about $74 back then to about $89 to $90 right now, the question you want to ask is it still valid that we haven't had a price increase? The answer is no. So how do we explain all this? What that means is simply that the president at the time had asked market forces to determine the price, right? And that price was set, let's set it at this price, which meets all the objectives that I had set out earlier. But at the same time is resemblant of the pricing for the market forces. Remember, market forces is not a constant price. It slips up and down. And if it is an economy that is not used to such pricing, it could create shocks in the system. So you really want to be careful how you play around with market forces. Now, what has happened is, because of the hardship that the federal government has realized that has hit on the ordinary Nigerians, the federal government has sort of seemingly changed from the strategy of allowing market forces to determine the pricing to adopting what we will call in economics a crawling peg. Now, what does that mean? It simply means, okay, if we have said, met our objectives with this, we've got the appetite holistically, we've been able to save some forex, can we not, for now, push it further so that we do not create more damage before we begin to heal the system? This is what I understand. So really, it's now perhaps a strategy, I believe, that has been studied from a physical standpoint to say, okay, we've achieved our objectives, now let's adopt a crawling peg system, because if we want to adopt the market pricing system, free market pricing system, we'll probably have gotten to about 800 by this time.
If not more.
If not more.
Interesting. A very good explanation. Now let's go back to this missing crude oil revenues, because this conversation is informed by the fact that SERAP is asking President Bola Tinubu to launch an investigation, as it were, into allegations of missing and unaccounted for funds, which, according to SERAP, has totaled over $15 billion in revenues, $200 billion budgeted for in refinery repairs. Now, I have two issues here, two things we need to pick out. Refinery repairs, which you've talked about, and I really want us to talk a lot about this TAM. TAM is a major problem, and for me, you are the energy expert here. I would really, really need more explanation on this TAM, because I don't know why we've invested so much money on TAM, and with your explanation, knowing that this thing can't work, but we're still pumping money into it. That's one. Now, two, if you go further, there was a report by NATI, that's of course the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, in 2021. In that report, it stated that government agencies, including the NNPC, that's the Nigerian Petroleum Development Company Limited, and the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, both of them are accused of failing to remit to the tune of $13.591 million and $8.25 billion to public treasury. This whole terminology is confusing me here now. You're the energy expert. Help us make sense of this missing funds. Where are these monies going to? And why are they missing? Why aren't these agencies of government remitted?
Okay. I'd like to start my conversation this way by saying, I wrote an article a while ago, and that was during the COVID period, and it was titled, "The Chicken Has Come Home to Roast." Right. Why did I sort of title it that way? Let's talk a little bit about remittances. Okay? During the COVID-19 period, we actually had, and I'm talking about the root cause. During the COVID-19 period, we had a situation where, for the first time, the pricing of crude in the US, those forward contracts, were actually having negative pricing, simply because they couldn't have a way to dispense the consignments. Now, and that was because of demand. The world was shut down at the time. Now, that was the time where truly the NNPC had issues remitting FX. However, that condition was sort of normalized. And I'm going to say this. Okay. Now, let's understand that the current system, or the system that we ran in Nigeria before now, was more of a system where there wasn't clarity around the segregation of powers and controls. In civilized nations, the way it functions is that there needs to be clarity. Okay, let me give you context. Before now, the NNPC was actually an arm of the sort of Nigerian government, but in terms of looking at production of oil, exploration of production. What that meant was that there was a potential conflict of interest with the government being a regulator and a player in the business. It's what people were having a very big outcry. And one of the things that led to the Petroleum Industry Act. Now, when you have a government itself being a player in the same business, as well as
the regulator,
a regulator, it meant that the NNPC was actually a cash cow. What I mean by that is NNPC can remit, and it was statutory. So you and I got to know NNPC as the one that would fund the CBN purse. Okay? But with the birth, we were very excited about the Petroleum Industry Act because from a standardized standpoint, it means well for Nigeria. Segregation of control, government focus on your regulations. NNPC competes as a profitable entity, perhaps with assistance from government, but let's separate you guys so that you guys focus on your core duties and there is no sort of conflict or clash. This was what it was. And then we had the birth of the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Commission, the regulatory commission that was meant to come and do much of that regulatory work. Cascade till today. Sequel to the signing of the Petroleum Industry Act, sometime in August of 2021, it became very unclear whether, because now, remember, after signing that, you have kickstart the process that now makes NNPC completely independent. Right? It means that NNPC, by law, are not supposed to be the cash cow for the government anymore. They're just supposed to remit their taxes like every other company.
Okay.
Do you get what I mean?
Okay.
By being independent. However, it is almost, the analogy is almost like saying a child has been birthed, but does the child have what it takes for their organs to make them survive, or do they need to go into the incubator? This is the question. Was Nigeria really ready for the true implications of having the NNPC cut off its umbilical cord from the country itself? Do you get where I'm coming from?
Okay.
So this is exactly what led to the NNPC not having to really remit money anymore.
For the period stated.
Correct. Because it had become independent. And the way. So the thing is this. We had not worked out, and this is the thing about policy and implementation. This is the truth about policy and implementation. In our entire structure of our regulatory framework, there are what the lawyers will call a lacuna. The lacunas are the gray areas. We understand how to write policies. Policy implementation, we're not there yet. And understanding how to cost off from one regime of policy regime to another policy regime, we haven't gotten there. So I remember sitting at a debate and I said, look guys, congratulations, Nigeria is about to understand whether it can survive in using the economics of the rest of the world, or whether its own economics is a complete deviation from the Adam Smith theory of economics that governs the rest of the world. The reason is I understood that Nigeria was not ready to be starved of FX as we were actually having, from the NNPC. We had not built a framework for the transition in policy, for the when you talk about the physical manifestation of those consequences, right? From an economic standpoint, we had not built a framework. Then, of course, when it happened, rather than look at what was the implementation logic, could we have given some time, okay, some buffer period for that implementation, we began to have blame games. But I'm sitting here to give context to what could have made these agencies, or for the NNPC, for example, not remit, because there was no clarity as to whether they are still supposed to, and really that would be against the PIA. The PIA is saying you are now independent, you're now NNPC limited, company limited. So it wasn't the same framework that was operating before, where they were conjoined twins with the government. That's to explain that. Now for the turnaround maintenance,
which is the thorny part.
That is the part that I cannot, in all honesty, explain. Because, as I said, the root cause would have told us that this would not work. And even if it worked, it wouldn't have given us a meaningful capacity. I mean, you had to change things. And if you were doing that, I mean, let's just say, let me give a benefit of hindsight that one of those turnaround maintenance recognized the limitations in the system and decided to do system changing, changing those systems to start to run our crude. If that's the case, it would allude to something more sinister, which will be that we are colluding to actually destroy our own economy. Because I wouldn't understand why, if you had done that, let's even assume you brought in experts. We had some lessons learned workshop to identify what has gone on, and it still went on perpetually, then that's sabotage.
Economic sabotage.
Economic sabotage. I cannot explain that. That's a very painful part. But, the only thing that I can say is, let us hope that the model, because I think I've been privy to some conversations around what the government eventually decided to do, which was to partner with an external firm who will come, do the turnaround maintenance one more time and then run it.
I want to ask Dr. Wisdom, you're an expert in this field, an energy expert, and you have given from the beginning of this conversation a diagnosis, by my understanding, of what the problem is. And if I follow through your analysis, that would imply, as I did say before, there was already a mistake from the beginning.
Yeah.
You said that the kind of oil we have is the light one. That's why it's called Bonny Light.
Correct.
And our refineries, the installations we have, are supposed to handle heavy. So we are making it underperform. You gave the car analogy that even though you do some tweaking to make the car work, it will eventually break down. My question here, we've had experts, we've had persons, we've had companies. If you go through the documents, you have foreign companies who come and do diagnosis and they tell you what the problem is. Was it that they never knew all through the years that we'll practice TAM, this turnaround maintenance, knowing that it will break down, or the fact that it has become a conduit that certain persons have identified and have said, this is my office, this is where I must get my monies from. So, again, Is government complicit by default, knowing that it is supposed to not continue to spend monies, successive governments now, on turnaround maintenance, rather build a new one that can accommodate, what we have? Or somebody's not saying something here. That's the question.
When I kind of tackle these questions, I'm thinking, which criteria should I be looking at? Should I be looking at the technical criteria, the economic criteria, or the political criteria?
Whichever one. As long as we get answers.
Because, as I said, when we look at, the way the political answers that we get to our problems here, it's more like, let's budget this, let's budget that, less economics to it. We don't do economic, simulations and find out, okay, which way is it profitable? And certainly, like we discussed just before now, budget performance, it's something that is completely alien
to Nigeria.
Not because it is not something that we can do, but actually, it is because it is convenient to roll out budgets and defend the budget. I mean, are you not in the same country where, why are we surprised, just to say something about the turnaround maintenance, when in the same country we have an entire expenditure that cannot defend the end product, which was a company logo? For Nigerian, is it Nigerian Air?
Nigerian Air. It was supposed to be for a national carrier.
God bless you.
That was the last administration.
The truth is this. I am not surprised. I am not. Where we don't have, kind of midway economic talks about our budget performance, where we have no metrics to measure our return on the investment, where economic fundamentals is simply not the way to go. It's not the way we go, sorry. When we're going political, how else, what is the product? Why am I surprised when we, have in a country where we borrowed to share the money out? So we found out that some of those initiatives that was done in the previous administration was borrowed funds. We had trader money and the rest of them, and there was no way to measure what is being done, the
with
capital efficiency of these funds. Why am I surprised? Why am I surprised that at some point the answer to the problem was blow up and the printing press and print so much naira? And what is the net effect? High inflation and a very, very high exchange rates. We have too many naira chasing the dollar. It was widely in circulation. Why am I surprised? So the question is not to say whether the answer is not to say whether they're
we're trying to establish complicity here.
Yeah, but the thing is, are they ignorant of what, are we putting the right fundamentals in place in deciding and making key decisions? Because, if I say whether they're complicit or not, it's more like indicting them.
No, the truth is, Dr. Wisdom, I need us to establish something, because we cannot move forward if we don't look back at where we're coming from. Look at it. The analogy I gave.
Yeah.
We've had experts come in. At some point, the refineries were working, and they broke down. And for me, that was not the first time they broke down, right? We have experts. They come, perform a diagnosis, look at the problem, spot it out, write a report and say, hey, this is the problem, fix it. It's going to cost you X, Y, Z. Was it that we didn't bring the right experts to look at the installation in its entirety and say, for the kind of crude you have, this is the wrong installation? Because if you continue to maintain damaged equipments, eventually wear and tear will set in. That's where I'm asking. Was government before now ignorantly complicit? Ignorantly.
We can use that term. The reason why it's appearing so, that's just the truth. But the reason I'm not saying that explicitly is because I'm not privy to, again, some of those reports I'm not privy to, and also I do not understand the decisions that came in. The other thing that I would like to highlight, okay, is even when we repair these refineries, okay, we need to understand if we have the volumes that it takes to run these refineries. Because the volume issue has come forward in part of the arguments why, again, the Dangote refinery, but it could be a very, I'd like to say that it could be a very convenient argument why it's moving its startup date. But that's one of the arguments, and I'll explain why. When we go for some loan, FX loan, we are tying those loans to some of our future production volumes. So call the volumes that we intend to produce in future X. From that volume of X, we have forward contracts that says, give me this amount of money for the next 10 years, takes XYZ amount of crude. Okay? Now, we also have within our framework, if we look at the PSC contracts, production sharing contracts, which govern the deep water, and you look at the joint venture contracts that govern the onshore and the shallow water installations, what you would see is the deep water production sharing contracts. It's solely a contract where you pay royalties and taxes. You sell your oil, pay royalties and taxes, right? The joint venture is actually where the government has a percent. In some installations, they have 60% of the crude volumes. So why is it important to clarify this? When we look at the contract, look at the production volume from Nigeria, just know that out of that production volume, we have a lot of it in the production sharing contracts where those guys produce totally and just pay their taxes. So don't even count that. Don't start multiplying the price of crude times that volume quoted and say that is the price, that is the money that accrues to government. Okay? The one that accrues to government is now the 60% of the JV contracts, which is the one that government puts in money, 60% of money, the investor puts in 40%, for example, and then when they sell, 60% of the crude belongs to the government. Okay, so we've established that only a fraction of our total volume belongs to government. Out of that fraction that belongs to government, the government has also earmarked some volume to a forward contract. They've earmarked it already. So for the next 10 years, there are contracts that are tied to some of the loans we've gotten. Out of that, we used to have crude swap, but they're trying to end those crude swap agreements. Out of that, we have then the domestic allocations, the domestic crude allocations. Right. What does that mean? It means, in a hypothetical sense, you could have a facility built with the right capacity to run. Again, that's why I don't try to indict them, because I don't know some of those reports are not privy to us. We know the original design basis, but we haven't been kept updated on some of the recent happenings. But then, if your domestic allocations are not enough to still give those refineries the crude that they require to run, we still got a problem.
It's complicated.
It is very complicated, because if you still give them, say, the operating envelope says you need to have at least 60% feedstock to operate where you would not have a breakdown that often. And then your domestic allocation, because of all the factors I have described,
Loans.
means that you have such a low volume that you say, oh, sorry, refinery A, we can only give you 20%.
It will underperform.
It will underperform. This is why, and this was all described in my article, which, by the way, the federal government got a copy, and it was quite touching for them, which I said, the chicken has come home to roast. Because sincerely, It is complicated. So whether the facilities are still being repaired to produce heavy crude, right? And we can't source them, or they have been fully repaired and now the domestic allocations are the problem. I don't know.
Dr. Wiss, we cannot, because of the complexity of, this whole thing. I mean, the more we try to explain it, the more complex it appears. What is the solution to all of this? Because right now, SERAP is doing what it started really supposed to do, asking for accountability. How do we come out of this quagmire?
Okay. The first thing is, it's a good thing that we're ending some of those crude swap agreements. That frees up some volume for us, right? Because again, as I started out saying, just to buttress your point, we need to find a solution to this, because as long as you're just taking raw crude and sending it outside, what you're doing is you're exporting raw crude, and you're only getting economic rents. Economic rent in this context means you're only getting 15% of the capacity that you're supposed to get.
Wow, that's low.
Because the downstream sector, let me put it into another context. I watched a video which made me very emotional. And that video was a tour guide who was in South Korea, and he was describing things about South Korea to some Nigerian tourists. And she said, our country has built out of nothing. We don't have raw materials, but here we are having some of the largest refining capacities. We take crude from Nigeria. She was laughing. We take crude from Nigeria, refine, and then sell back to Nigeria. It was quite funny. And it made me realize that by so doing, we have lost 60% of the value chain. So imagine South Korea being developed to that extent widely because we have exported 60% of our, of our revenues to them. Because when they refine and we pay them for that, we're basically paying for that 60%. And then we talk about the gas and the midstream. What is the solution? It's a fantastic plan that will freeing up some of those volumes. By so doing, we would then be able to have the feedstock so that when these refineries are out there and operational once more, we have the volumes to run them.
Dr. Wisdom, not to cut you, but because of the want of time and lack of same, invariably you're saying, let's begin to refine, produce, and do everything here.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Correct.
And on that point, I must say thank you.
Thank
you so much. As much as we would have loved to continue, because I've got so many questions to ask, especially the more we keep talking about it, the more mysteries become unearthed. And the more we know where the root problems are and how to solve them. As they say, it's a low-hanging fruit. Dr. Wisdom Enang has been my guest. He's an energy expert and, of course, an analyst. And you've listened to the analysis he's given, somewhat practical, somewhat, academic. Don't blame him. It's his expertise. Thank you again, Dr. Wisdom Enang.
Thank you, sir.
And we're looking forward to bringing you back again.
Thank you.
Because these issues are ever evolving.
Absolutely.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, from that point, we need to have these conversations. And the more we talk about it, the more we bring out a lot of this, very unclear areas, the gray areas. And that way we are one step to solving the problem by tackling the root cause of the problem. I hope you benefited from the conversation as I have been, enlightened as well. Let's do this again tomorrow. As usual, I'll leave with a prayer. God bless Nigeria. My name is Ikechukwu Juwe with a salute to you. It's bye for now.
Security, current affairs, governance, politics, your view, elections, rule of law, economic issues, foreign events on the Talking Point. Talking Point, weekdays on this channel.